There are times when taking action is the only way. The staff kicked the old man out of the bank. Then a police officer brought him back to handle the situation. Joseph was angry and frustrated. He was also worried. He had to get the money, but no one was listening to him. The purpose of the bank was to give him the money. It was his money. How could they tell him he couldn't have it? He had to get that money. The bank employee couldn't keep his money. The 92-year-old man was very angry and confused. His wife depended on him. He couldn't go home without that money. The bank employee tried again to explain that they couldn't give him the money. His ID card had expired. They weren't allowed to give him money without valid documents. It was true that they could see it was really him, and it was true that the card had only expired a week ago, but their hands were tied. The bank's policy required a valid ID to withdraw money from a bank teller. They wanted to help him withdraw money from the ATM, but he didn't accept that either. Joseph didn't trust machines. He didn't even have a bank card, and without an ID, they couldn't give him one. It wasn't going to work. If he wasn't allowed to get money from the bank employee, he wouldn't have any money to buy what he needed. He felt very anxious and afraid. His eyes filled with tears. But when one of the bank managers came and touched his shoulder, the man got angry and started yelling at them. He even swung at him. His stress levels were high, and the old man was completely losing control. He kept shouting that they couldn't keep his money, that he needed his money. He kept yelling and yelling that they couldn't keep his money. The situation was getting worse. The security guard came and gently held the old man by his shoulders. Then they took him outside the bank and told him to come back when he had valid identification. They didn't understand how desperate he was. To them, he was just an old man overreacting. They didn't know he had so many reasons to be afraid or worried. He came back, knocking on the door and demanding to be let in. That's when the bank called the police. They didn't want to get the old man in trouble, but they were worried that he had become a danger, especially to himself. He was so angry that he might actually cause real harm to himself. There was a police officer named Kaleb near the bank. When the call came in, his shift had already ended, but when he heard that there was an elderly person in distress, he decided to check it out. He had been working all night, but he was the closest to the bank, and he had the time to handle the situation as gently as possible. He just hoped that the elderly person would see it the same way. Kaleb took the call, and as quickly as possible he headed to the bank, shocked by what he saw. The elderly man was pounding his fist on the bank doors, his face flushed, and his eyes filled with tears. He was begging them to open the doors and let him in. It was a painful scene. He knew he would have to do his best to calm this man down. He was afraid the elderly man might have a stroke. He couldn't risk upsetting him any further. He had to get to the root of the problem as soon as possible. When he saw the elderly man turned around and started complaining that the bank was trying to steal his money. They were holding the money he had worked so hard for. Kaleb needed to know the whole story, but he also needed to get the elderly man away from the bank. To calm the situation, he asked Joseph his name and offered to take him for a cup of coffee across the street. Why was the elderly man in such a desperate state? Was it for money? Kaleb was shocked when the elderly man explained that he had no other way to pay for anything. He had run out of money and didn't have a bank card. If he couldn't get the money, he wouldn't be able to buy food for himself or his wife. But things got much worse. Kaleb wasn't worried about himself. He was desperate to get the money, because without it, he could lose the most precious thing he had. His beloved wife was very sick and needed medicine, and he didn't have the money to pay for it, not without withdrawing money from the bank. Joseph was angry with himself. The old man was 94 years old, but he had a sharp mind, and he usually kept track of things. He always had extra cash and even extra medicine, but in the past 2 weeks, he had also been sick, and things got out of control. He couldn't go out. The couple had a nurse who came once a week to help them, but they didn't have anyone who could help with the housework. They didn't have children, and most of their nieces and nephews were living their own lives far away. With his wife's illness, it was all up to Kaleb. He went to the bank to get money and did all the grocery shopping. He even made sure to pick up his wife's medicine, but in the past few weeks, he had been suffering from a severe flu and couldn't go out to do these things. Now, they only had enough medicine for this morning. If he didn't get his money, his wife would have to go without her medicine. He had no other way to pay, and that could be fatal. In addition, he also needed to buy food. The elderly man didn't have much energy after a severe flu, but he had to get up and take care of things. He gathered all his strength and went out to the bank, only to be told that he couldn't get his money. His ID card had expired a week ago. With everything that was happening, he hadn't noticed. He couldn't even understand why they couldn't show some compassion. It was just a week. He looked the same after a week. Surely they could identify him with the old card. But that wasn't the case. He didn't even have a driver's license he could use instead. He had been taking the bus since his eyesight got worse. His driver's license had expired over a year ago. Joseph had been through a lot of shocks in the past year. It made sense that the old man was at the end of his strength. He watched his wife get worse every day. He was the one taking care of her, and now he felt like he was failing in his duty. It was sad and worrying. Something that could destroy someone much younger. He understood what the bank was saying, but it didn't help him. There was no way he could get his paperwork in order that day, and he couldn't reach the licensing department that issues ID cards. It was across the whole city. It would take hours to get there by bus, and he wouldn't be back in time to get everything done. He bowed his head and sipped his coffee, trying to hide the tears that were gathering. This was the last straw. The old man felt completely defeated. His heart couldn't take any more setbacks, but sometimes, in our lowest moments, others can lift us up and help us. Kaleb was tired, but he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep, knowing he hadn't done everything he could to help. He asked Joseph to come with him. They stopped at the police station to get Kaleb's car. He was officially off duty for 2 days, which meant he had all the time in the world to help his new friend. Then they drove to the licensing department. Usually, you need an appointment to renew your ID card, but the uniform has some benefits. Kaleb was able to talk to a supervisor and explain the situation. They knew that the 94-year-old man wouldn't have money for food or medicine without the card, so that softened their hearts. They decided to make room for the elderly man, but there was more bad news. Joseph wouldn't get an ID card on the same day. It takes 4 to 6 weeks to arrive by mail, but they could give him a temporary ID to use. Kaleb just hoped that would be enough for the bank. Who knows what the bank's policy would be regarding a temporary ID? They had made it very clear that they wouldn't back down from any of the policies they were following, even if it meant that one of their longtime customers would remain hungry with the new card in his hand. The two men headed to the bank. Kaleb was worried. It was the day when banks closed early. They were getting close to the end. Kaleb refused to believe it. He rushed inside and begged them to stop. He explained what happened. Then he spoke. The old man offered a humble and sincere apology to the employee he yelled at and to everyone else. He had never felt so ashamed. This was the worst thing he had ever done to anyone in his life. Even if they couldn't help him, he wanted them to know how sorry he was. The bank manager finally decided to bend the rules a little. The bank wasn't closed yet. They still had 5 minutes left. Minutes that should have been used for closing, but now they were being used to help this old man. Instead, they got him his money. They also gave him a bank card, even though he didn't want to use it. He would have a backup plan if anything like this happened again. Kaleb had already done a lot for the old man, but he wasn't finished yet. Joseph thanked Kaleb for everything he had done when they left the bank. The old man hadn't seen such kindness in a long time. He knew that the police officer had had a long night, and he must have been tired, but his kindness would stay with him. Kaleb just laughed. He was far from finished. There was no way he would leave the old man now. Kaleb had lost his only grandfather. He had lost his only grandfather the year before, so it was nice to spend time with someone who reminded him of his grandfather. He had nowhere he needed to be. He could spend more time doing something truly good. Kaleb took the old man to the pharmacy to get his medicine, then took him to buy food from the grocery store on the way back home. They even stopped to get takeout food for Joseph and his wife. It had been a long day, and Kaleb didn't think Joseph would want to cook. It was a special treat from the officer for the elderly couple. They rarely had anything from a restaurant because of their pensions, so they had to be very careful. Medical care costs were piling up even with extra help from the government. The cost of living was also high, and they didn't have many extras. Besides, his wife was too sick to go out, but that didn't matter. Joseph still had his wife, and that was more precious than anything. But Joseph could never have imagined what he found. Later, he took Kaleb to his home just in time for the nurse to arrive. His wife had started to worry, and now her husband arrived with a policeman. But she was happy to meet the young man who had helped them so much. They didn't know how much he had helped them. Later that night, Kaleb had long since gone home to finally get the rest he deserved, and the couple were spending their time together. Then Joseph took out the envelope that contained the money he had left. He wanted to make sure he still had enough for the rest of the month, but he was shocked. Kaleb had given him the envelope so that the young man could pay for food and medicine. It was quicker for him to count out the old man's money. As the day went on, Joseph felt extremely tired, which made him give up control to someone else. It was comfortable, but he never expected what he saw. And he showed his wife something amazing. All the money he withdrew from the bank that day was still in the envelope. Kaleb hadn't used any of it. The young man had paid for their food and even their medicine out of his own pocket. That was a greater blessing than he could have imagined, and it didn't stop there for many years, until their passing. Kaleb often visited the couple and helped them with food. When he could, he took care of the things Joseph couldn't do. In the end, what became one of Joseph's greatest regrets was actually a great blessing. Kaleb felt as if he had grandparents again, and the couple were no longer alone. Sometimes our lives can change when we take the time to lend a helping hand to others. Kindness changes lives. How wonderful is that? Do you judge people who get very angry in public places? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and join us again to watch more amazing stories.